Time now for a look at the morning papers. And the soldiers cleared of murdering an Iraqi civilian lead on many. The Daily Telegraph's headline is "Paras cleared as Iraq trial collapses in an £8 million fiasco." The Times also concentrates on the cost of the collapsed trial, but says it failed because star witnesses flown in from Iraq provided exaggerated and false statements. The Daily Mail, which carries a picture of the 7 defendants, asks why were they on trial at all? The Guardian takes the opposite view. It highlights delays on the part of the military in interviewing witnesses, DNA samples not taken and burial records left uninvestigated. The Daily Mirror leads with EastEnders actors Ross Kemp and Steve McFadden. It features the allegations that in real life they've been beaten up by their current or ex-partners under the headline "Bish Bash Bosh." The Sun gives prominence to the problems faced by Steve McFadden, but also points out the problems of Ross Kemp, who's allegedly been attacked by his partner, the paper's editor Rebecca Wade. The Independent breaks with the consensus. It says that secret research by the police in a typical market town has uncovered the shocking extent of the use of crack cocaine. And finally, the Daily Express is angered by curators who want to abandon the term "before Christ" in favour of "before present." Apparently, the change is to avoid offending other religious faiths in what the paper says is political correctness gone mad. Its headline is now "Christ is banned." Well, in just a moment, we'll have a full review of the papers with George Jones, political editor of the Daily Telegraph. But first, a massive air and sea search is underway after 2 boys were swept out to sea near Lulworth Cove in Dorset. RNLI from Weymouth, Dorset Police, the Coast Guard, helicopter and rescue team all searching the area. The 3 boys were fishing on an outcrop when they were hit by a wave. Our reporter Richard Drax is on the scene. Richard, what's the latest?
Well, the search goes on, Deborah. There are about 50 people here searching for these 2 boys who are local boys. One, I understand, is about 15 and one is 16. As you've said, they were fishing on an outcrop. There were 3 of them at the start, all friends, and a freak wave or a large wave which was blowing, and the high winds at 7:30 tonight when they went into the sea swept them off the rock. One went into the bay and he survived and managed to raise the alarm, and the 2 other boys, we believe, were swept out to sea. Since then, there has been, as you say, a massive search. There's about 50 people, 2 helicopters, one from the Solent Coast Guard and one from the police, one police helicopter, 7 ground search teams. They've been searching the shore now with torches and obviously searching from the air with their infrared equipment. And so far, no joy. I understand that parents and relatives of the 2 boys are in a local hotel being comforted by police, and a liaison officer has been appointed to look after them. The search, they say, is going to go on for as long as it takes, because obviously at this time of year the water's not too cold. The 2 boys may have been able to cling on to rock, and of course, while there's any chance of finding them, the search will continue.
Richard Drax, for the moment, many thanks for joining us, and of course we'll keep you updated on that story throughout here on BBC News 24. Well, time now for that review of the morning papers, and with me in the studio is George Jones, the political editor of the Daily Telegraph. George, what have you been looking at in the papers?
Well, today is interesting because Fleet Street, or the newspapers, have got to decide how to report a story about their own kind. I mean, we love to take down public figures, I mean, like David Blunkett and his tribulations, but what do you do when it concerns another newspaper editor? And there tends to be a sort of unease within papers about attacking other newspapers, other newspaper proprietors, because it's a bit sort of, you know, if you don't do it to me, I won't do it to you. But I thought we'd start with the Mirror because, of course, Mirror in deadly rivalry with the Sun, and they have great fun on their front page with the news of the arrest and subsequent release of Rebecca Wade, the editor of The Sun, for this alleged assault on her husband, the star from EastEnders. And it's done very jollily. Bish, EastEnders Hardman Ross, battered by his missus. Bash, EastEnders Hardman Steve, battered by his ex Doris. And Bosh, are the EastEnders Hardman just a pair of big girl blouses?
Of course, the Daily Mirror is bound to pick that up.
It's bound to pick that up, isn't it?
No love lost between those two.
No love lost. And of course, what was the Sun? We were all waiting to see what would the Sun do. I mean, would it bury it at the bottom of page 53, or would it own up to it? And of course, they were saved to a certain extent by the other EastEnders star, Steve McFadden, allegedly also being punched in the face by a former girlfriend. So they do it very well. EastEnders Hardman beaten by lover, but then at the bottom the strapline and his bruv, which is.
Because they've just been highlighting, haven't they, the
whole issue of domestic violence.
Domestic violence, yes. So this is
but inside, they do actually own up to it a bit more, and they have here trouble and strife, ex-thumps, Enders Phil, and also they go on about Ross Kemp, and apparently Miss Wade, they say she was released from the police custody, returned to the Sun's offices at Wapping, East London, to mastermind production of the newspaper.
So as if nothing happened,
yeah,
really.
And last night she said it was just a silly row which got out of hand. Ross said it was a lot of fuss about nothing.
Domestic, and we're not linking those two, are we?
No. And the Times, which is, of course, another newspaper owned by Murdoch,
yes.
What does it do? And it tries treat it a bit as a joke, really. Hard man of EastEnders decked by the ginger ninja. But it quotes, because they all work in the same place, same building or group of buildings in Wapping, and it says one son inside has said this is Rebecca Wade when she turned up at the office. Quite a brave thing to do, to go and turn up at the office and continue to edit the paper. She looked rather sheepish and tired, but was greeted with a spontaneous round of applause. And of course, Rupert Murdoch, the big cheese, was actually in town this week, was actually at Wapping today, but he was apparently said that they shouldn't take the matter too seriously. So it looks as if she'll probably keep her husband and keep her job as well. I wonder if
they've been giving that advice out in their papers, that they shouldn't take it too seriously. It's people in glass houses, perhaps, isn't it? Okay, let's move on.
The sort of more serious story, which makes the front page of The Guardian and The Telegraph, is this collapse of the Iraq murder charges against the soldiers. And as you say, some of the newspapers highlighted the cost, 8 or 10 million, depends which figure you take. The Guardian says that there's likely to be a political row because allegations that this trial was politically motivated. The Guardian says, of course, the British Army actually was in a very difficult position because under legislation which this government has signed, if the British Army had not taken this to court and shown that it had thoroughly investigated it, it could have gone to the International Criminal Court. So you could have seen British soldiers on trial in The Hague over this case. So I think they were caught a bit between a rock and a hard place on it, but it appears to have been a very unhappy incident altogether.
It is tempting to think that, given the chance of getting out of Iraq to testify, any Iraqi would have jumped at that chance.
Well, you would, yes, and they were also being offered money, and there is a tradition, I think, in the Arab countries, isn't there, of blood money for these kind of incidents. Now, today, are we doing Moonies? Moonies. Yes. The Telegraph reports that the head of the Moonies church is actually going to come to Britain.
This is a cult, isn't it?
This is a cult.
Yes.
And you go back quite a long time. In 1995, Michael Howard, currently Conservative Party leader, then Home Secretary, excluded the head of the church, the Rev's son Ming Moon. He's 86 and founder of what is actually called the Unification Church. He barred him, believing he would not be conducive to the common good. But Charles Clarke, current Home Secretary, has lifted the ban. He said, I decided that at his age there was not a good enough reason to keep him out of the country.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, with the latest terrorism bill and inciting to violence and things like that, they have said, Charles Clarke has actually said, that it's actually cults, isn't it,
yes,
really, and extremists.
But I think there have been allegations about this cult about raising money and alleged brainwashing.
And brainwashing,
but I don't think there's been any
not terrorism. No suggestion of that.
But they do have, what is it? There's a picture here. What is it? 4,600 couples taking part in a mass wedding in South Korea this summer.
But it's a thin line, isn't it, when you're dealing with a cult and with extremists?
But I'm sure they could use those powers when they get them. Now, I don't know, those people who are still up may well have been watching the television tonight for this fascinating head-to-head debate between David Davis and David Cameron. And the Times, which I think is probably a story which may well be replaced by the debate, but they report that David Willetts, who surprisingly came out for David Davis, many people thought he'd back either David Cameron or Kenneth Clarke, is clearly unhappy with David Davis and his tax cuts, and it says David Willetts has dealt a blow to David Davis by criticising him for making tax cut pledges. But of course, David Davis has done quite well in that TV debate.
And who's the Telegraph backing?
Well, we're still waiting to see. We will back whoever wins it, I think.
OK, one more.
One more. Shall we do Seeing the Pope?
Seeing Red? The Pope?
The Pope, yes. Apparently the Pope
Seeing Red with the Pope.
May not have achieved the mass popularity of his predecessor, but apparently has a fondness for designer shades, that's sunglasses, and Prada shoes, and he's winning fans in the fashion world.
And in Italy too, his
And
home.
in Italy too, yes.
Yes.
Apparently he sparked what are being dubbed as cassock wars in Rome by dumping the services of the papal robe maker, which has been in the job since 1792, and adopting a
Not
tailor.
the same one, I hope.
No, adopting a tailor who's been in business for only 20 years.
Oh, gosh.
And you've no time for redheads.
We haven't got time for redheads, I don't think, which is a shame. But
which is a shame.
Yes, well, I'm safe anyway, because I'm a natural blonde, so you have to speak slowly. Anyway, George Jones, thanks very much indeed. Let's get the weather now. Matt Taylor.
Good morning. The rain will still be a feature, I think, of our weather during the next few days, but for some, compared to yesterday, today's not looking too bad. It'll be a good deal brighter, but that little bit cool. That's because winds will be in a west or northwesterly direction, especially for southern parts of England and Wales and Northern Ireland. A brighter start here, but a wet and very windy start for northern parts of Wales and northwest England. The rain persistent through much of the morning. Also a wet start for Scotland, but that rain will become confined to eastern Scotland and also northeastern parts of England during the afternoon, where the winds will still be at the strongest and very gusty indeed. As I said, a little bit cooler for all of us. Temperatures around 10 to 13 degrees, and it will turn a good deal cooler, I think, during the coming night. In fact, the rain, as it clears away, will leave clear skies, and with longer nights at this time of year, it does mean temperatures will plummet away. Temperatures down to around 3 or 4 degrees, low enough for a touch of grass frost in a few rural spots, but it'll be all changed towards the west later in the night. The cloud and the rain moving in. After a bright start, it will push in across the southeastern parts of England, lingering here into Sunday, but elsewhere, Sunday's a story of sunshine and showers. Goodbye.
What Howard would or would not like is beginning to irritate me.
We shall take control as a tool.
Egypt. The search continues Sunday at 9 on BBC One.
What kind of man is it who doesn't feel humiliated in the position you're in?
If you touch me, I'll scream.
Stay away from me.
I was thinking if I'd be serious again.
Something wicked this way comes.
Shakespeare retold. 4 films starting Monday at 8:30 on BBC One.
This is BBC News 24. Let's get a summary of the news now at midnight. Tony Blair has come out fighting after a bruising 24 hours. First, David Blunkett resigned, then the government narrowly avoided defeat on its new anti-terrorism legislation. He said he did not want to compromise on his plans to detain terror suspects for 90 days. 7 British soldiers have been cleared of murdering an Iraqi civilian at a court-martial in Colchester. The judge has ordered they be found not guilty, saying there wasn't enough evidence to secure a conviction. A recording of a 999 call made on the 7th of July from London's Tavistock Square has been heard in public for the first time. It was released as part of an investigation into the response by the emergency services to the terror attacks. The editor of The Sun, Rebecca Wade, has been released without charge after being arrested for allegedly assaulting her husband, the actor Ross Kemp. His co-star, Steve McFadden, was also allegedly assaulted by a woman. She too was arrested but later released without charge. A former leading White House aide has pleaded not guilty to charges of perjury and obstructing the course of justice. Louis Libby, who was the Vice President, Dick Cheney's Chief of Staff, could face 30 years in prison if he's found guilty. Now remember, if you want any more details on any of those stories, you can get it on our interactive story, on our interactive site, BBC I, together with news of the weather and the sport. Well, now on the problems facing the Prime Minister. Tony Blair has admitted that his government is facing tough times, with David Blunkett's resignation from Cabinet and the opposition to new anti-terror laws. Mr Blair has been speaking to BBC's North West's political editor Jim Hancock about the proposed extended detention of terrorist suspects.
Now, my position is very clear as Prime Minister. I have no doubt if the police and those who head up our anti-terrorist operations are asking for this power, we should give it to them. And what I've got to try and do over this next week is convince as many members of Parliament as possible. This is not an issue to play around with. This is about the security of this country. And for Conservative MPs and Liberal Democrat MPs and some of my own, who at present are voting against what the police want, I think they should go out and talk to their constituents and see what the country wants.
But they're not playing around, are they, Prime Minister? They genuinely feel that civil liberties are being seriously offended by this.
Yes, but you say to me civil liberties, and they say to me civil liberties. We've got to decide whether the civil liberties of people who are detained as terrorist suspects for up to 3 months, every week they've got to go back in front of a court, if those civil liberties come before the civil liberties of the vast majority of people in this country to be protected from terrorism. Now, I say the civil liberties of those people, the majority, who need protection from terrorism, should come first. And I don't want to diminish any of these arguments about civil liberties, but this is a situation in which the police are saying to this, it's not something the government's dreamt up, the police are united on this. They're united on wanting this 90-day detention so that they can protect Britain. Now, we have got to have very good reason before we turn around to the police officers and the people who are working their socks off to protect this country and say, well, no, sorry, we know better than you, or someone else's civil liberties come first.
But backbenchers clearly got the impression when the vote didn't happen last night in the House of Commons that the government were going to compromise on it. There's a great deal of surprise today that apparently at Cabinet you reiterated what you've just told us. Well, they thought compromise was in the air.
There shouldn't be any surprise about it at all. If we are forced to compromise because we can't get the legislation through, then no one should be in any doubt that is not the right solution. The best solution, if we can't get it because people won't vote for it, we can't get it. But the best solution is to do what the police say they need in order to protect this country from terrorism. And it is time people understood that the civil liberties issue is not just about the civil liberties of terrorist suspects, who are a very small number of people who the police may need to detain in these highly sensitive, difficult operations. It's also about the civil liberties of the majority of people in Britain to be safe from terrorism.
What people are saying today, of course, is that your problem now is not just the conviction with which you speak, and I hear what you say, but that authority is draining away from you because of all the decisions that you've taken about not carrying on to the next general election. What do you say on the authority?
I tell you what I say on this, Jim. Never mind about my authority or not. It's time the members of Parliament, in particular the Conservative Party, the Liberal Democrats, some of my own people, who are saying the civil liberties of terrorist suspects come before the civil liberties of the majority of people in this country to be protected from terrorism. It's time that they explained it themselves, because I have no doubt about this at all. If the police and those heading up anti-terrorist operations say to us, we need this power to protect people in Britain, and they have given full explanation of why they need it because of the particular nature of these very sensitive, very complex, difficult operations, if they're saying that, then I'm sorry, I need, as Prime Minister, and it's my job to do the tough things, I'm afraid, a pretty good reason if I'm to turn around to the police and say, yes, we may still have a terrorist threat, yes, we know you're still foiling terrorist operations, but no, I'm not giving you the powers you need.
My point is that if you weren't going at some time during this Parliament, you wouldn't be having this authority problem.
Well, I don't know what that's got to do with it. This is an issue.
Apparently people think it's got everything to do with it.
This is an issue this week with members of Parliament having to make up their minds. Now, as I say, if we end up having to settle for an option that isn't the best option, then as I said to you a moment or two ago, that is not good for the country.
The authority issue, of course, is cumulative because it goes back to David Blunkett. And forgive me for putting it this way, but it seemed that you were desperate to keep hold of a friend, and when it was blatantly clear to most people that the code had been broken.
Well, I explained in the House of Commons yesterday why, actually, despite everything that's been written, when you look at the precise terms of the code and you take into account all the facts, as I was saying to one of your colleagues a moment or two ago, it isn't as it's been written. But anyway, that issue is done and over with. The important thing is now to concentrate on the agenda for the country, and that's what we're doing. And you know, when we were talking a moment or two ago about the terrorist legislation, these are the things that matter. Getting the reform programme through matters. It matters for the country.
The Duchess of Cornwall and the Prince of Wales are on their third day of their visit to the United States. They've wined at the White House, and the Duchess of Cornwall has made her first solo speech. Well, our correspondent Laura Trevelyan has spent the day in Washington and met the Prince's communications secretary.
Welcome back to Washington for more of our coverage of the royal visit, and joining me now to discuss it is the Prince of Wales Communications Secretary, Paddy Harverson. Paddy, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Can I ask you, what was the purpose of coming to America for the first royal visit of the married couple?
Well, this visit has been planned for some time, and the British government has asked us to come over here to really emphasise the close relationship that Britain has with America. Obviously, America is our closest ally, and we've shared a lot of ties over the years, not historical, cultural ties, and obviously in the Second World War and currently in the war against terror. So I think it's very much about, it's sort of soft diplomacy, not hard diplomacy, emphasising the closeness and essentially flying the flag for Britain in the States.
And Paddy, how do you think the visit's being perceived here?
Well, it's gone down very well. I mean, we've had a bit of carping in some of the tabloids about fashion and other matters, but in a very serious sense, we've got fantastic coverage. Certainly the reception we've received everywhere we've been has been great. I mean, last night at the White House, we had a great turnout, with a wonderful dinner, a wonderful reception. And just here at Georgetown University today, where the Prince has been greeted by a huge crowd of students. So we're very excited. It's gone down very well so far.
What about the Duchess of Cornwall? Does she mind the tabloids comparing her to Diana and saying she's frumpy?
No, I don't think she has any time for that. She's far too busy here. I mean, it's been really wonderful reception everywhere she's been. She did her first sort of solo event this morning in terms of the Prince came in support of her rather than the other way around on osteoporosis at the National Institutes for Health. That was extremely well received, so we're all far too busy to pay attention to all that.
She walked into a door, didn't she? Will you be worried about the coverage of that?
Not really, no. I think it got slightly lost on the way in, the gentleman who was showing her around, but no, it was just slightly amusing more than anything.
And now the Prince, yesterday at the White House, the way certainly it's being interpreted in Britain is that he said to George Bush, come on, time to do something on global warming. Is that how it was intended?
Well, it's certainly not how it's been interpreted here. I mean, I think if you look at the toast, and it was a relatively short speech, it was emphasising the closeness between the two nations. I think emphasising the leadership role that America does have in all issues around the world because of its position as the preeminent superpower. And I think in that sense it was a very positive message. It certainly was extremely well received.
Do you think it's appropriate for the heir to the throne to be straying into what might be seen as political territory, global warming?
Well, I don't think he was. I think he was really, I mean, if you look at the speech, if you read it properly, and certainly we worked with the embassy very closely on it and getting the tone right, it was really an important message of the cooperation and togetherness that the two nations have shown and the leadership that America can show the rest of the world.
Now, when this tour comes to an end, what do you hope it will have achieved?
Well, I hope it will have bonded even closer the two nations. It will have shown that Britain is a great partner and ally of America, and it will have shown that the monarchy has a role to play in that. And I think the popularity we've seen already of the Prince and the Duchess as they've travelled around will really re-emphasise the closeness of that bond.
Paddy Harverson, thank you so much for joining us. And now it's back to you in London.
Laura Trevelyan there. A former leading White House aide has pleaded not guilty to charges of perjury and obstructing the course of justice. Lewis Libby, who was the Vice President Dick Cheney's Chief of Staff, could face 30 years in prison if he's found guilty.
From the White House to the courthouse. Hard to believe that a week ago, Scooter Libby was among the most powerful men in Washington.
Back up, please.
In court, he heard the 5 charges against him: perjury, lying under oath, the obstruction of justice, all connected with the alleged leaking of an undercover CIA agent's name to the press. Mr. Libby told the judge he pleaded not guilty to all charges, and as he emerged from court, his lawyer was defiant.
In pleading not guilty, he has declared to the world that he is innocent. He has declared that he intends to fight the charges in the indictment, and he has declared that he wants to clear his good name.
But for the president, the Libby case is undoubtedly bad news. He left Washington for a trip to Argentina, knowing his approval ratings are at an all-time low, and that the spectacle of one of his administration's most senior advisors facing criminal charges is a gift to his political enemies.
The administration has learned nothing from its mistakes. Instead, it continues to hunker down and stay the course. Let's remember what got the administration into trouble in the first place. Secrecy, cronyism, and a willingness to ignore facts.
Even as Scooter Libby withdraws to prepare his defence, the uncomfortable truth for this administration is that the investigation into this entire affair continues, and there could be more indictments. Jeremy Cook, BBC News, Washington.
And the headlines here on BBC News 24. The Prime Minister says the government's facing tough times, but says he won't compromise on the controversial anti-terror plans. 7 British soldiers accused of murdering an Iraqi citizen are found not guilty at a court-martial because of a lack of evidence. A recording of a 999 call made about the terrorist attacks in London on July the 7th has been heard in public for the first time. It's been released to the inquiry into the response by the emergency services. Now it's time for the sports news with Andrew Cotter.
Hello again. Middlesbrough and Bolton are both closing in on a place in the knockout stage of the UEFA Cup after wins which took them to the top of their respective groups. Both teams were playing at home, and it was Bolton's 22-year-old captain Kevin Nolan who gave Sam Allardyce's side the victory over Zenit St Petersburg at the Reebok Stadium. Middlesbrough had a more convincing win over the Ukrainian side Dnipro. 3-0 the final score, with Australian striker Mark Viduka adding 2 goals to Yakubu's opener. Now, the spat between Arsene Wenger and Jose Mourinho might be coming to an end shortly. The Arsenal manager Wenger blamed the media for implying that he had called Mourinho stupid. And now Mourinho, who had accused Wenger of being a voyeur, added that he will say sorry on one condition.
If he's ready to apologize from Ivory about quotes and quotes and quotes and quotes about Chelsea, I'm ready. I'm ready to do the same. But of course, is not a personal thing. You know, of course, the intention is not to hurt. The intention is not to hurt the man, the human being. Of course not.
Britain's most successful skier will start work shortly to reclaim what he says is rightfully his, an Olympic medal. Alan Baxter was stripped of his bronze at the Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City back in 2002. He had tested positive for a banned substance, but it was later revealed to have come from a cold remedy. He was cleared of any wrongdoing, but didn't get his medal back. Sally Nugent has sent this exclusive report from the British training camp in the Netherlands.
Early morning in Holland. The highest ranked skier Britain has ever had. Alan Baxter, famous for winning an Olympic medal, then having it taken away. As he prepares for the next Winter Olympics, he still feels like he's been cheated of the best moment of his career.
You know, I mean, it's hard to describe the emotions now because it's been tarnished so much with, you know, the medal being taken away. But at the time, it was absolutely amazing, and you know, obviously, it'd be nice to get that feeling back again.
The build-up to the next Olympics starts in earnest tomorrow, with the Europa Cup slalom held indoors here in the small Dutch town of Landgraaf. It's a long way from those heady days when Baxter became the first Briton to win an Olympic medal in the sport. Alan Baxter says he sees tomorrow's race as a chance to build confidence before the World Cup and the Winter Olympics. But it is also another step on the road to rebuilding his own reputation.
The most successful British skier of all time now.
Shortly after finishing on the podium in Salt Lake City, Baxter failed a drugs test and was stripped of his medal. He says he'd been suffering from a blocked nose and bought a Vicks inhaler from an American pharmacy. The problem was the US version of the inhaler contained a banned substance.
You know, I was proven innocent, but I didn't get my medal and I got my world ranking taken away. You know, so as far as that is concerned, you know, I've dealt with it for 3 years, end of story.